So welcome back to Third Age Reforged, and once again we're going to be taking a look at Thranduil's Halls. This seems to be quite a popular map that I get sent, and I can see why people do like playing on it because it is a very attack-defense focused game. Last time I think it was the mirrored version where actually the defenders were on the outside here and the orcs poured out from what is traditionally the defensive position, but now I think we will be going back to the defenders essentially having their rightful place here within the halls, and it's going to be a 3v4, I believe, and there are three kingdoms of men. There is Dol, Amroth, Dale and Gondor facing off against some evil armies, I believe. So we've got Umbar over there, and then I think we've got Rune, and then a couple of orc factions, so there's Angmar and then Mordor. So yeah, it is a good versus evil rumble. We'll go through the army compositions relatively quickly because there are so many armies on the field, and generally speaking, by now I think most people kind of understand what kind of armies are going to be brought in this sort of situation. So first of all, Second Pink, who sent me the replay, is going to be playing as Gondor, and he has got some Gondor archers with the armour upgrade, so again, gone for a little bit more of a survivable archer core. Pelagia Marines and Cair-Andros marksmen. There's also some Gondor, well, there's some Wardens of Minas Ithil over here, which are of course the multiple HP rangers, which in a situation on an open field are a little bit vulnerable, but here they can potentially be very, very dangerous if they get into the right position on the field. And some Athelian rangers here. More Gondor archers and Pelagia Marines, so a lot of ranged forces. So early on in the battle, this may very well help out the Gondorian side of the army very much, but as the battle goes on, investing more into your range power might be to your detriment, as obviously you'll have less infantry to try and genuinely hold the line against a lot of attackers, especially when you're outnumbered. But we do have some Gondor infantry with the first level of armour upgrades here, so they've got these shoulder pauldrons, not dressed in their full plate, but still going to be good enough to take on and hold against the lower tier orcs. And then we've got some Citadel Guard over here, of course, one of the few higher tier AP spearmen in the game. AP spears in general are a lot rarer now, and the Citadel Guard are one of the best examples of this still in the game, so they are potentially a very good method of holding the line, especially against factions which rely a little bit more on their armour. Speaking of which, we have the Fountain Guard, which similarly are another AP unit who are also a polearm. They too are pretty much the centre of a lot of what Gondor do. I still believe that the Fountain Guard, you're very rarely going to see Gondor without them because they are so good. There's nothing wrong with that. Getting around them is going to be difficult for the attackers in this case. The Fountain Guard may very well prove to be the centrepiece of Gondor's defence, around which he's going to be putting a lot more Gondor infantry, of course, with the armour upgrades. Back here we've got another unit of Citadel Guard, another unit of Fountain Guard, and is this his general? It is. So his general is going to be in the Nimlothian Honour Guard, which are of course essentially just the shielded version of the Fountain Guard. A little bit tougher, obviously multiple HP, and the fact they have that big shield value means they're going to be less vulnerable to sustained range fire, which the Fountain Guard can find themselves losing a lot of men to. In the centre we have Mark XMD, who's going to be playing as Dale, and it will be his job to try and defend the central passage, which admittedly is probably the most difficult way to go through if you're the attackers, especially if you're under a lot of ranged fire. And of course Dale will be able to oblige there, so he's got some Earls of Escalation, which in terms of a holding frontline infantry unit are one of the more quality focused that you will find. They are of a similar class to the Guardians of Khan Doom and even to the Castamir's Legion. You do pay for this, however, and generally speaking you cannot mass up the Earls of Escalation to the same extent because Angmar, of course, the rest of their army is cheaper, and Umbar you can have 4 before the price increases. Over here we do have some Swordmasters of Karnan, so again some skill-based shock infantry over here. Not AP, but of course their higher skill means they are going to be more difficult to kill in melee. Lower armor values than other Swordmaster units of a similar type, so for example the Swordmasters of Cair-Andros do have higher armor than the Swordmasters, but the Swordmasters in general having lower armor can help them in certain cases. So it'll be interesting to see how it works out here, but obviously they're going to be able to carve their way through lower tier orcs all day long, and of course pretty good countermeasure to sort of lower tier shock troops as well, potentially. The front line of Dale is obviously going to be made up of their more traditional holding units, so we have the Barding Herd, a very good halberdier unit, a very good unit to hold with. They've got very thick armour, they've also got a slight shield value, so they're not the easiest units to even skirmish down from a distance, and obviously in melee those Bardiche axes are going to be able to deal out some nice AP damage to the attackers as they move forward, which all of the attacking armies to some extent are going to be having some decent armoured units, 2 units of those, and also some Dalian spearmen to absorb the charge in the front, and also to add some more mass to the polearms that are around them. No ranged units at the moment, but I'm sure we will get into those shortly, and indeed here they are. So we've got some Dalian marksmen, pretty much the bread and butter of the Dalian skirmish line. Overall they have slightly higher stats than the equivalents from the other kingdoms of men in terms of ranged prowess. Not bad in melee either. However, as we look down here we have the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, which might be the General's bodyguard, Well, that might be the Royal Guard actually, but yeah, obviously the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, definitely a good choice for zoning out individual units with their AP missiles, but of course they only have so much ammunition, but even when they do run out of ammo, they are a very accomplished melee fighting force as well, AP and melee with their guts swords. And then over here, yes indeed, the general you can see in the background is going to be a part of the Dalian Royal Guard. They are not AP, but I believe they have more ammunition, and also they're just in general a safer pick. I hesitate to say that, but the Dalian Royal Guard, probably a safer place to put your general, because the Blackshot Dragon Slayers are going to find themselves the target of a lot of the enemy's attention in a field battle, for example. But of course that's down to personal preference. We have the Barding Herd here and the Earls of Escaroth, and I think that's going to round out Dale's force other than up here on the Virgin. Just before we move along, we do have some Bardian Marksmen as well, so again one of the toughest mainline archer units that there are, very similar to the Abruzani Nadubawi from Umbar, and there is another unit that's very similar to them, but their name escapes me for the time being. The final defensive army before we move on to the attackers, we have Dol Amroth, and they have brought a trebuchet, so this piece of siege equipment could well be very handy, although to be honest, across the way is the only army that has deployed themselves into mostly loose formation, so we shall see. Trebuchet would be much better if it managed to sort of target the bottleneck that the attackers will be forced into, but we'll see how that goes. The Etalond Halberdiers, or Echelond Halberdiers, I'm not really sure how it's best to pronounce some of Tolkien's words sometimes. Another Halberdier unit complements well with the Barding Herd, of course, so more AP. Very good holding unit for Dol Amroth, provided they don't get outranged by enemy pikes. Belfalas Marine, so more javelins to add to the Gondorian ones. Doran Ernil Pike, so he's gone for a very polearm-centric army, it seems. He's got a lot of pikemen. And he's also got a lot of Etalond men-at-arms, or Ethelond men-at-arms, I should say. And yeah, obviously, as far as a standard infantry unit goes, they're going to be very decent as well. They don't have the armour upgrade on, but they are still a very good holding force, and they'll still be able to outclass a lot of the attacking infantry you would expect. And we've got some Haven Guard, which is where the general is. Imrahil going to be rolling with his best infantry unit. We can't actually see an awful lot of Dol Amroth's army, because of course they are technically in the trees, so we'll see more of them as the battle goes on. Now for the attackers, we have Ragnar playing as Mordor. We'll go through the attackers a little bit more quickly because generally speaking they're going to have similar kinds of armies you would expect. So he's got a lot of Morannon infantry. At the front he's got some fodder. He does have a ballista as well, which could be handy if they manage to get in range of the trebuchet to destroy it. A trebuchet is a big investment to lose for nothing. Morannon archers as well as some Orc javelins. Heavy maulers will be very useful against all of the defending factions because all of them have got some pretty nice armoured units. Another unit of maulers. We've also got the Temple Executioners down here with the armour upgrade. So with the armour upgrade they should be able to beat any infantry unit that they are facing, even the Haven Guard, because the armour upgrade is going to be a significant buff to them. That should be enough to give them the edge. Some units of Sauron's Will. Troll Drummers, which of course will keep all of the low tier forces in line, as well as some Olag High, a very good troll unit of course. And then over here, which I'm assuming is going to be the general, we have the Nazgul. In the last Battle of Thranduil's Halls, the Nazgul were not enough to pull out a victory. We'll see if that's going to be true this time. Now we have Angmar, which overall are going to be similar to Mordor in how they played out here, you would expect. So we've got some Angmar Halberdiers, got some Trolls of Angmar over here as well, a little bit more defensive than the Olag High with those big shields. But ultimately they will still be able to crush lines in the same sort of way that the Olag High will. Now this is risky, but potentially a match-winning pick here. We have the Witches of Angmar. If they manage to get a good hit on any one of the three front lines that are going to form, it could well prove to be the thing which swings this battle in favour of the attackers. We've got another ballista over here, so more siege. Guardians of Kharn Dûm are a very good front line. We also have some Gundabad Guard here, some Blackwatch Legion and some Witch Realm Blackguard, a very elite force actually, which might come back to bite them if they don't have enough units to genuinely attack. Then they're going to need some cannon fodder here, so we'll see how Rune have set up. Now Rune have probably got a lot of their army in the trees, so again this is not the entire runic force, whereas Angmar don't have trees, so that is their entire force outside of potentially Goblin Archers and Snugger Stalkers. Over here we have Cole, who's going to be playing as Rune, a couple of units of Eastron Clansmen here at the front and some Eastron Warriors, so decent first force in. There's going to be units in the trees over there, as I said, and then a couple of units of Gamprim, which, you know, halberd to halberd fighting is probably going to break out on the front line somewhere. And we also have a unit of cavalry, so the Dragon's Wrath Warlords. This is going to be where the runic generals hang out, multiple HP Lancers. We'll see, because as soon as those front line break, as soon as one of the front lines breaks, getting cavalry in behind the lines can prove to really scour the defenders from the field. So we'll see how Rune can do that. And then finally, of course, we have Umbar, personal favourite of mine, a couple of units of Corsair Archers and a unit of Belagair Archers. And over here we have a lot of Corsairs, which necessary at this point, because not a lot of the others, it seems, have invested an awful lot into their fodder. And you need a lot of fodder in a situation like this, where you're forced into such a dangerous bottleneck. A couple of units of Abrazani Nadu Tariq, and they have not got the armour upgrades, which is unsurprising considering the money available to them. Same with the Abrazani Narduzagar. 3 units of the Castamir's Legion, obviously very, very solid infantry unit indeed. And then we've got some Corsair Pikemen and some Belagair Footmen, all of these units in column. And then finally, our Farazon the Golden is going to be in the unit of Naru Naaru Royal Guard. So, without further ado, we shall begin. I will make a little cut though, because it does tend to take the attackers a little bit of time before the engagement starts to begin. And this is a long one, nearly 60,000 frames, so I will see you when the battle is joined. So here, just past the 10,000 frame mark, is a decent enough place I think to join, because while the melee has not yet begun, it is going to be rather imminent, because all of the forces are sending forward their various lower tier units. In fact, it is entirely essentially their trash tier units. So we've got Mordor's Orc Fodder, we've got Angmar's Snaga, we've also got the Corsairs and the Eastrons just backing them up. Now I do worry that this force is maybe a little bit too trash, and that they do need a few units that are going to be capable of holding these units together, as if they attack without any genuine damage dealers, they're just going to bounce off the defensive lines here. You can see the defenders have got men to spare for these parts over here, and the Dalian Spears will be able to hold against fodder all day long. Trying to attack uphill into a Gondorian spear and infantry line is going to go disastrously, and the same can be said as well of Dol Amroth, who have got some Tarnostian Guard and forming up their front line. It's been a somewhat interesting trading of artillery blows thus far. We can see that 2 of the Dalian catapults have already been destroyed. One of them was pushed to safety, however. It's going to be saved up. So the ballista across the way there, Mordor's ballista, has done a decent job thus far, although they're not really going to be able to hit those Dalian marksmen with too much ease, and to be honest with you, probably a bit of a waste of their ammunition. The defenders have got archers to spare, and you're not going to be able to really prevent your own forces from taking too much damage. And also the trebuchet has been bombarding the defenders, so it has been actually quite some time, more time than I was expecting to skip. Mainly because the attackers were all getting into a position where they could all advance as one, which is a good idea, but that did offer ample opportunity for the Dol Amroth Trebuchet and the Dalian Catapult to bombard the attackers, and they got a few telling hits. I think the Witchround Blackguard took a grazing blow, which is a bit of a thing for Angmar to consider as the fight goes on, but here we can see the first melee engagement of the battle, and it is going to be Second Pink attacking downhill with his Gondor infantry, and of course they will be able to fairly easily deal with the Orc Fodder. However, the Gondorian infantry are under arrow fire, but the Gondorians, more than most, are going to be able to withstand that sort of thing. The Gondor infantry is sort of charging forward and I think trying to break the Orc Fodder, and they are inflicting a lot of casualties here onto the low tier units. There are some Eastron clansmen in the background over here, however, and they won't roll over and take it with quite the same level of casualties as the Orc Fodder are. There are also some Snaga Stalkers, which, believe it or not, are actually substantially better than the Orc Fodder at fighting in melee with infantry. They do technically wield axes, although their attack scores are so low that the axe bonus probably doesn't help them all that much. And we can see the Eastron clansmen getting into position. We can see that Gondor moved into position on this line over here, and of course they have a very substantial firing squad. The Gondor archers at the moment are the ones who are letting loose their arrows first, which is understandable, of course. You don't want to be using your ranger ammunition on, and there you can see the trebuchet arcing into the background into the attacking armies. Interestingly enough though, Second Pink leaving a flank exposed here, and this means the Eastron clansmen are going to be able to get in and around this singular unit of Gondor infantry and get them surrounded, and he does notice this almost immediately. So a good spot there from Cole, but this secondary unit of Gondor infantry is coming forward to reinforce. But time will tell. I mean, this unit of Gondor infantry here is going to take some substantial losses, and whether that's going to be worth it in the long run. As the defenders, when you're outnumbered to this extent, you can't really afford to be too reckless if you want success. But I do appreciate attacking. While over here, nothing going on over there. Dol Amroth not being attacked either. So, in many ways, Gondor did force the engagement here earlier than I think the attackers were expecting. I think they were going to try and hit every angle at once, which as the attackers is something you always want to do. It means the defenders have to divide their forces rather than focusing their attention on one particular area. dividing the attention of the enemy skirmishers is also going to be pretty important. The second pink is continuing this assault, however, and the Citadel Guard is not a unit to be committed lightly, and their AP isn't really going to help them too much over here. A lot of these units are fairly... Well, we'll say that, you know, they aren't really given the benefit of having good armour because they're not really expected to survive a battle. And you can actually see that this is actually tempting a lot of the attacking forces into gathering over here. You can see... Ooh, now that's a real problem for second pink. We can see over there on the other side another ballista that has been brought by Umbar. And that's a very good... Oh no, that's Angmar's ballista. So very good spot there from Horsey Hawks. Because immediately you can see here that the Gondorians are going to have to try and get into a position where they aren't taking quite so much damage, and maybe into a position where the ballista inflicts friendly fire onto the attackers as well, because they're much more likely to break as a result of the ballista, and I think that's what he's trying to do. But even so, this is a situation that he has got himself into now, and he has to... It's going to be interesting to see how that ballista affects this front line, because this is a lot of infantry that second pink has committed. And it's the sort of thing which honestly can tip the scales in the attacker's favour too much from the offset that the defenders can never really come back from. But a lot of the initial attacking forces have been committed over here. Colton 37 has committed forward a lot of Corsairs. Admittedly, you know, they're so cheap that they're not really going to care too much about them. But obviously, as the attackers, the primary advantage is your numbers. So you don't really want to throw away that advantage too early. But having said that, that ballista is in a lethal position here. If it gets a few more decent shots, the Gondorian front line is going to be in a pretty bad way. Although, to be fair to second pink, he has moved his Citadel Guard over here to the point where they're least likely to be impaled by the ballistae. It's not really working out too well, though, at this point. And also, in the background over there, we do have the Barrow Wights, which are a fantastic melee tar pit. The other two front lines still have not begun fighting yet. So it's very possible that Gondor are just trying to take the majority of the casualties early on here, but even so, I still wouldn't have sent out the Citadel Guard quite so soon. There's a lot of arrow fire coming into the back over here, though. I think the Dalian archers are giving some support to their Gondorian brethren. And while on the other side, we also have the Nimrodel Rangers marching backwards and forwards. And it is going to be mainly a case of trading archer blows everywhere else, although I certainly wouldn't be using the Nimrodel Rangers this early. Although potentially shooting them into the back of that big blob over there could be the sort of thing which yields a lot of casualties and makes it worth it. They're attacking into this area over here, though, which means some of the arrows are getting wasted. You can't afford to waste your rangers in a situation like this, and unfortunately now another unit of Eastron clansmen from Cole is once again trying the same thing that they did before and trying to wrap around. And at this point, if I were the Gondorians, I would not send any more men forward. So ultimately, I think we can chalk this up as a bit of a win for the attackers. That ballista has been... Those were some lethal shots there. That ballista has been absolutely pivotal in the way these opening engagements have gone. If that ballista wasn't there, then I think Gondor would have been doing the right thing here. But you do need to keep an eye on what your opponents are doing, and a lack of perception here is, I think, what the problem was from Gondor. They charged forward thinking they had the beating of the infantry, but ultimately the infantry was not the main danger. The Nimrodel Rangers are still firing their arrows in, but again, it's too late to really save this Gondorian front line. The Citadel Guard defeat seems certain, surrounded on all sides by low-tier clansmen and corsairs, and Snaga. And the attackers have yet to commit forward any genuinely elite forces, so a big win for them so far. And this is interesting. Now the Troll Drummers have moved forward, so the Troll Drummers, of course, are going to be able to keep these low-tier forces in line. Just having a look on this front line again. The Corsairs, so again, the Umbar low-tier units doing themselves justice here. Very cheap unit, the Corsairs, not entirely free like the first Snaga or Orc units are, but even so. Barrow Wights are also going to move forward. Not that they are in real need of a tar pit at this point. Might be best actually to save the Barrow Wights for when they do, because at this point this fight is definitely going to go in favour of the... Well, eventually it's going to go in favour. The Gondorians have managed to fight their way through the worst of it, although I think that's because the Eastron clansmen pulled back. If they remained on site... Oh no, they are still there. Well, the Gondorians have managed to fight their way through a fair amount of troops then. Interesting. There are the Barrow Whites getting filthy. What is going on over here? So still elsewhere, the battle has yet to really be joined. You can see this front line over here made up of Tarnostian Guard, and then at will, men-at-arms can be moved in to reinforce that area. And there are also the Dole Amroth polearms, the halberds and the pikes lurking around here somewhere. Oh, the ballista is firing, and I think, yes it is, it's just about in range of the trebuchet now. So Dole Amroth is going to want to get this trebuchet out of here. The trebuchet has already done a decent amount of damage, though it might already have used the majority of its ammunition, to be fair. If that is the case, then getting the attackers to waste their ballista ammo will be important. The attacking ballistas have been pretty lethal so far. Very good choice of siege weaponry considering the situation. Still a few individual Citadel Guardsmen here, but ultimately at this point they are going to be overwhelmed. The Barrow Whites are going to make doubly sure of that. The Snarker are wavering, which is amusing. They probably took a fair amount of friendly fire, to be fair to them, from their own ballista. And at this point it might be a case of the attackers just accepting the fact that they've probably had a pretty decent time, but they're probably still behind, and indeed they are, but relatively speaking that was a pretty good engagement for them, I think. They lost a lot of men, but the Gondorians lost 2 units of Gondor infantry and a Citadel Guardsman. Not the kind of units you really want to be without, considering the flood that's going to come forward from the other side of the river. There's a lot of good units left. There's a lot of arrows still flying everywhere. Troll drummers still in place. Pelagia Marines getting into position up on this hill now. What are they going to be going for? I mean, they're immediately finding themselves coming under arrow fire from the Morannon archers down there. They're going to go for the trolls? I think they are. Indeed. It's not going to be enough to bring them down in one blow though. Trolls have got enough HP to withstand a couple, but trying to get rid of those troll drummers is a worthwhile endeavour. Now the ballista has turned their attention on the front line of Tarnostian Guard, which is not a bad move. Trying to whittle down this front line over here, because generally speaking this area of the map is where the defenders tend to break first, because there's more surface area for them to cover, and the mass of the attackers on this map tends to carry them through here first of all. The other 2 areas are narrower, and one of them has a hill. Although this is where the attackers are pushing first by the looks of things. The Barrow Whites are moving forward, but having said that, this defence is a pretty serious one. Gondor infantry backing up the main event here, which is going to be the Fountain Guard. And the Barrow Whites will last in melee for quite a long time against the Fountain Guard and exhaust them, but you can't really see the attackers getting through here unless they send up some much more serious units in terms of damage. The Barrow Whites are very tough, but damage is not that... Oh, hello. But once again, that ballista proving to be a real problem for Gondor, because they've got... Here is a position where they have to defend. If they let the attackers through here, it's disastrous, because the whole outer defence then will have to either fall back or form up a very long defensive line here in the fields behind the cliffs. And I think, yes, the Fountain Guard just pulled back, so they're going to allow the Gondor infantry to be the first ones in. Yeah, that Angmar ballista so far has been the MVP of the game. Fountain Guard getting into another position to take cover behind this, what can only be described as a picket fence more than a palisade. The Gondor infantry is now fighting against the Barrow Whites. The Barrow Whites, I'm certain, cause fear, but in this situation there are enough inspiring units around that it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Defeat seems certain, but now that the Fountain Guard are in melee, the Barrow Whites should be fine, and what remains of that unit of Eastron clansmen is fleeing from the front line. Already taken a lot of damage from the outer Gondorian defence. Still, there's no action elsewhere on the line, which surprises me somewhat. The attackers are willing to attack up here, and I thought the whole point of them grouping together was that they'd be able to attack all angles at once. As it is, though, we've got Belagai footmen moving forward from Umbar. More archer fire coming from the Dalian side of the wall, the Dalian marksmen firing on the Umbar troops as they move forward, but Umbar are very well placed to survive that sort of beating. There's still a lot of troops left to go, including a lot of Castamir's Legion, Guardians of Khandu, a lot of serious troops. There's another unit of Eastron warriors moving forward, which in terms of a pure melee focused unit, are slightly better than the Clansmen. They would make pretty good backup for the Barrow Wights in this situation, against the infantry at any rate. Again, getting through the Fountain Guard is going to be a whole different matter.
Something changes in the course of battle, for defeat seems almost certain.
Gondorians are ballooning their arrows high up into the air and shooting down on the attackers as they approach. Troll drummers are now over here, and now we have an attack through the middle. The Orc fodder is advancing. However, it's exceedingly unlikely that the Orc fodder are going to make any inroads against the Dalian spearmen. With the Troll drummers in close attendance, the Orc fodder will at least stay in the fight for longer, which is really all you can ask of a unit like that, to be fair. Meanwhile, over here, Dole Admiral still yet to be tested, which does surprise me. This historically has been in the more vulnerable section of the map. I mean, with the Ballista Overwatch, that is changing somewhat. This area of the map a little bit more vulnerable to this sort of thing, I would imagine. But having said that, traditionally this is the part of the map you wouldn't want to attack up, the sheer hill and the very narrow choke point, especially when you're going up against a faction like Gondor. Ugh, but that Fountain Guard is just taking an absolute beating from that ballista. And again, the case is made for a defensive ballista. The defenders did have siege weaponry, but the attackers were more than prepared for that with all their ballistae, and also proving to be a very good countermeasure to the defending infantry. Gondorian archers still firing all the way. And at this point, there is a bit of a problem with what the attackers have done here, but nonetheless we will have a little look at what's going on here in the middle. And they have sent up some Morannon infantry, so a little bit more genuine quality, which would be enough to give the Dalian spearmen pause, but Mark XMD, wise to this, is immediately going to send forward the Barding Herd, and of course they will carve their way through Morannon infantry with those AP halberds. The problem here though is, this attacking force is not going to be enough to break through, regardless of how well supported they are. There's some Narim across the way there. The real problem is that their reinforcements are not on hand, and I can see why all of their good units are still a little bit further back. As soon as they come further forward, the Gondorian Rangers and all of the Dalian and Gondorian archers are going to open fire on them immediately. But you need reinforcements, because if this attack breaks, all of this progress would have been for nothing. And I think some Gondor archers are moving forward now to try and halt the advance. This is where the most likely place for a breakthrough is going to happen, but even so, Gondor are still going to have the resources to hold back this amount of troops. But if there was a continuous assault from units that are across the river, that would be a different matter. The Trolls of Angmar are coming forward, which is likely going to be attacking over here. The Eastron Warriors, now the Belagaya Footmen, are backing up the Barrow Wights, but there's still a lot of Gondor infantry and Gondor archers with armour upgrades they have to hack their way through. And at this point, I mean, if I were Gondor defending in this situation, despite the rough start, I'd be feeling pretty good about our chances, simply because the attacking reinforcements are a little bit too far away. Although having said that, Morannon archers moving forward, the Witches are moving forward, which as soon as I realised they were on the field, they would be something that I would be keeping tabs on pretty constantly. Dole Amroth have still yet to be engaged in melee. An impatient wait for them, I'm sure. And while this unit of Gondor infantry, only 31 of them left alive. They've held off against, the Barrow Wights are not the easiest unit to engage one-to-one for a unit of basic infantry, so they've done pretty well for themselves, to be fair. And the Eastron Warriors, without range support, as long as they're not under range fire, the Eastron Warriors are a very efficient unit indeed. Meanwhile over here, the Dalian defence easily holding against the Mordor attack. It's a probing attack at best, and it hasn't really gotten anywhere. A few Dalian spearmen have perished, but ultimately the presence of this Barding Herd makes getting through here very difficult. Unless you smash through the lines quickly, you're not going to get too far. Another unit of Morannon infantry is being committed though, so they are trying to probe from more than one side, which is good. I'm still surprised they haven't gone for the Dole Amroth defence though. The Ballista Overwatch would have been useful over there as well. They still have that. Well, they had a Ballista. I'm sure that at this point they've probably used up their ammunition, because there was a lot of artillery trading in the bit that was cut. There's only so much I can say about that though. Now the Belagaya Footmen have found their way to the front line alongside the Eastron Warriors. Not the easiest unit to cut your way through, although now the Fountain Guard are back on scene. 45 of them left. As soon as the ballista notices they're back, I'm sure that it will open fire again. But the Fountain Guard are desperately needed on this front line. Basic infantry and archers that are out of ammunition are not going to cut it. And Gondor could do with holding this position. There's a lot of reinforcements still to come, however. A lot of the battle still to be played. Still not even halfway through yet. And generally speaking, the vast majority of Thranduil's halls takes place in the outer section of the battlefield. Of course, I'm sure we will see the interior, but that tends to be like the final 15 to 10% of the battle. And by then, we've already got a pretty good idea of who's going to go on to win it. There are javelins being used, however. The Orc javelins have found their way forward. They've been battered by the archers on the approach, however, unsurprisingly. But they are going for the reserve unit of Barding Herd. Meanwhile, Morannon archers have moved forward. Another unit of Morannon infantry. The Dalian firing squad still doing its work. There's a lot of Morannon infantry to cut their way through. But they're also receiving some support from the Dol Amroth archers. Well, actually, no, that's Dalian archers who have taken up a position over there. Shooting into the sides of this Morannon infantry, which, even without this support, you'd expect the Dalian front line to still hold. With it, you'd expect them to hold quite comfortably. The Wardens of Minas Ithil, however, just firing their arrows up into the air, that's a real waste. Even if they are going for the Trolls of Angmar... actually, I see why they were being used. The Witchers are here. I mean, they still don't have a very good angle, so they're ballooning their arrows up into the air, which means they're not really going to do much in terms of damage. The Witchers have found themselves a pretty decent safe spot, but the defenders do know where they are, so they will be keeping close tabs on them. More Morannon infantry has moved forward, more Orc javelins. It looks as though Ragnar is going to be shouldering the burden of continuing to reinforce these front lines and hoping that attrition is going to do their work for them, which, you know, attrition is an attacker's best friend most of the time. These Belagar footmen, however, are shaken, and the presence of this Fountain Guard on the front line has completely changed the outlook of this battle over here. The Eastron warriors, I think, routed. Indeed they did. They pushed a little bit too deeply into the Gondorian lines, and ultimately that's going to be to their detriment. And now basic Umbar spears on their front line alone are not going to be able to deal with the Fountain Guard. They do have the Barrow Wights, but you can see that the Barrow Wights, there's 151 of them still left alive. I think this is the same unit of them anyway, so it just proves how tough they are. But ultimately they will not really be able to get through the Fountain Guard too easily. They could try and force their way around over here and try and inflict some attack from the rear penalties on them, but there's enough reinforcements over here that the Barrow Wights will be pounced upon pretty quickly. Meanwhile, there's a bit of movement across the river. The Abrazanim are moving forward in addition to some Flagrim, so a lot of AP troops, which, when they're being committed, it's probably a sign that the attackers are making a more genuine go of it. Javelins being used, trying to sort of whittle down this Dalish front line. But, having said that, they're going to need some more reinforcements over here pretty soon. They do have some Morannon infantry in reserve, however, so no big deal there. But Dale have held very steadfastly here in this canyon. Well, this gap, I should say, not really much of a canyon. Dol Amroth, however, still yet to be engaged in melee. So they're just here, they're waiting. There's only a unit of Orc fodder over here as well. I mean, there is a case for saying that if all of these reinforcements go elsewhere, there's a case for saying that Dol Amroth should maybe counterattack downhill like Gondor did earlier on. Because there wouldn't be all that much to stop them, and they've got a lot of, you know, good units back here. I mean, admittedly, mostly of a more defensive nature, but if there's no real opposition other than this Orc fodder, they're going to find themselves in a bit of a pickle. Well, Barding Herd holding up very well, though the Olag High came in here for a second there and then immediately pulled back out. I'm interested to know what they were actually thinking there. I mean, as soon as the Olag High were there, the Dalians were having none of that and decided to back up the line even further with the unit of Earls of Escaroth, which is very understandable. This could prove to be a bit of a catastrophic waste of the Olag High. I mean, some of them retreated, but some of them are caught. And the Olag High were not really in a good position to do as much damage as they could have there. What's going on over here? Still, the Barrow Wights fight on. It looks like the Fountain Guard have been pulled back once again. I would assume that the ballista spotted them and decided to open fire once more. And without the Fountain Guard, the battle flips back in favour of the attackers over here pretty quickly. And honestly, Gondor don't have a choice here. They need to keep the Fountain Guard in melee, otherwise this defence could fall apart, and then all of the good things on the other fronts that they still have intact would go to waste, because then the defenders would have to go into full retreat back to Thranduil's halls and hope that they weren't caught. And with that heavier infantry on the way forward, you don't want that. The Witchers are still running backwards and forwards all over the place. Are the Witchers going to try and use their fiery balls of death down here? Well, the Witchers have been spotted, and the Wardens of Minas Ithil are immediately trying to kill them. So the Witchers need to get out of there, otherwise they are going to have been brought for nothing. Because immediately you can see all of the archers from the defenders targeting down the Witchers, and for good measure they're also hitting the Orc Javelins when they miss, so a lot of this close range punch is being lost by the attackers at this point. Oof. It was definitely a bit premature that the Witchers were committed forwards here, because when all of these skirmishes are still in effect, it's the sort of thing you commit at the end of the game when there are no archers left alive and there's no way that they can respond. But here, not great for them. Some Morannon archers still trying to do some damage to the Dol Amroth front line, but again, I think they were going for the rangers, but it's mostly spearmen and men-at-arms who are going to be able to withstand Morannon archer fire relatively easily. Dale are going to hold there in the middle. And the Fountain Guard, when they're back on the front line, things look a little bit more rosy for Gondor, but even with them here at this point, the Barrow-wights are starting to wrap around a little bit, which is not a good sign for Gondor. What's going on across the river there? The ballista is once again firing. Can't have too much in the way of ammunition left at this point, but you can see that Cole is going to commit forward his Loka Flagrim, or Loka Flagrim. And with that AP, Gondor is going to be in a spot of bother. But emphasis here on Dol Amroth. I mean, they could counter-attack to a certain extent. They don't want to get too far in, because then of course the attackers would send forward a lot of their army like they're doing with Casimir's Legion now, but maybe the opportunity is gone at this point. They could have quickly collapsed in here. The trolls are a little bit of a problem maybe. It would have been a bold move, but it could have been the sort of thing which potentially did a lot of damage. And again, Sakenpenk is pulling his Fountain Guard back. Not a good move. I mean, they were going to get pounded by that ballista, but at this point you're jeopardising the whole defence if this area falls. That's going to be very bad, because you're going to have to spread out your forces and defend a much wider angle. And you can see here that the Gondor archers are breaking. Seeing the sight of the Fountain Guards turning their back on the needy troops has forced the Gondorians to rout, and at this point, I mean, the Barrow-wights have really proved their worth as well, because very few of them have actually died. And at this point the Gondorian firing line is in jeopardy, because the Flagrim are going to be able to get into the Gondorian archers, prevent them from firing, and that will offer probably the best opportunity for the attackers to move forward a lot of their troops. Less of the archers are going to be firing. More Gondor infantry has been committed forward, but Gondor infantry is not going to do all that well against Flagrim. Having said that, the Flagrim are up against Caer Andros marksmen, which they won't go quietly into that good knight in melee. They do count as two-handed swordsmen in melee, but for the time being it looks as though they're being battered by the Flagrim. Those AP maces, very, very useful against the Gondorians. Meanwhile, there are also the Abrazani Nadu Tariq over here, more AP troops. Fountain Guard defeat seems certain. At this point their formation is not in a great place. The Gondor infantry trying to force back the Barrow-wights. Flagrim burrowing in there. I mean, at this point, you know, the Gondorian player here has made a few mistakes and a few missteps, but at this point the emphasis is on one of his teammates to try and help him, because they have to realise that if they lose this area and the attackers pour in over here, they're going to need to retreat, and all of these defensive positions will have to be abandoned, which would not be a good thing. I mean, the interior of Thranduil's halls is obviously a fine defensive position, but you don't have the elevation advantage in there that you do here. These cliffs are a very, very useful place to be. Meanwhile, over here you can see that Mordor trying to keep up an assault over here. The Morannon heavy maulers with their AP going to be pretty nasty on the Earls of Esgaroth and even the Barding Herd. There are also these Dalian marksmen over here, which are out of ammunition, sort of forming up a bit of a backstop over here. The Olag High, meanwhile, are proving to be a real problem. They're still here. So the defender's starting to struggle a little bit, and the emphasis is on Dol Amroth here, I feel. I feel as though Dol Amroth need to do something. At the very least, they need to send troops to support their ally if they're not going to attack. And at this point, their allies are the ones shouldering most of the burden. The Barrow Whites are starting to take losses, so their hit points at this point have been expended, and with their relatively low stats, they will start to fall away pretty quickly. See, they are starting to get cut down, but their work has been done. They've been part of an attack on Gondor, which for the most part so far has been pretty successful. Pelargir Marines that presumably have run out of ammunition are now being committed to the front line to try and hold back this attacking force, but the Abrazanim, a very good choice to attack here with, again, another AP unit with their maces. Now here, it's highly possible that the Flagrim got far too greedy here. They weren't happy with just taking on the Caer Andros marksmen, they wanted more. But ultimately the Wardens of Minas Ithil are not going to be the sort of unit you want to go after with an AP mace unit. Highly skillful rangers in melee are going to send you packing, especially multiple HP ones like the Wardens. They probably should have turned around when they saw the Citadel Guard coming and engaged them, but ultimately still relatively successful. They still took out a lot of those Caer Andros marksmen, only 6 of them remaining. A lot of their damage potential is gone. Now the burden falls on the Abrazanim. And we shall see, without the support of the Barrow Whites, who are slowly but surely losing manpower, the Trolls of Angmar are on their way over here now though, so really the Gondorians have taken the lion's share of the punishment here early on. So that means in the late game, if the defenders are to win it, it will be down to Dol Amroth, who have taken very little in the way of losses thus far. The Trolls of Angmar are on their way forward, and they will probably be able to punch a hole in this line, and with the amount of damage they can do in conjunction with the AP of the Abrazanim Nadu Tariq, I can only see this fight going in one direction unless more reinforcements are forthcoming. But Gondor can't have a great deal of infantry left to commit. I mean, they do have some Fountain Guard, they've got some Caer Andros marksmen, Marines, Honour Guard, a few units that have fallen back. They've fallen back off the walls at this point because I think they realise the danger. Trolls of Angmar. Still, they're still content to just try and skirmish down with Dale. The Blackshot Dragon Slayers are firing at something. The Olag High were fully committed over here. And Dale are starting to struggle a little bit as well. I mean, Trolls can wreak havoc in a very neat defensive line. And while the Trolls were not present, Dale were holding relatively easily, but now with the Trolls and also with some ranged support from the Morannon Archers, starting to struggle a little bit more. The Swordmasters of Karnan are in here now though, and of course with their skill they will be able to rip orcs apart, and the Olag High are starting to fall away as well. I mean, it is still a very thick defensive line they had to deal with, and you can't ask them to go through that many Barding Herd, Earls and Swordmasters and expect them to live. But still, decent damage done to Dale. Dale have got a little bit more left in reserve I think, although Dol Amroth are now filtering their Ethelond man-at-arms to various other points of the battlefield. I think they realise the need for their troops to be elsewhere. The Trebuchet is also firing now as well though. It's a nice blob there, so the Trebuchet did still have some ammunition left. Unfortunately only hitting some Corsair archers there, but still, a hit is a hit. Here come the Ethelond man-at-arms. Very timely intervention too. The Fountain Guard are here, but the Trolls still sort of in and amongst the line, so more infantry being committed. The reinforcements from Dol Amroth are most welcome, I'm sure. And finally, Dol Amroth mucking in melee. And this is a good thing because Angmar definitely mean business over here, because the Guardians of Khan Doom are reinforcing the Abrazanim Nadu Tariq, which is a very potent mix. So those Dol Amroth soldiers are going to be a very necessary part of this defence. In fact, the Fountain Guard might be in a bit of trouble here, because there's still some Trolls, there's still some AP from the Nadu Tariq, although there isn't very many of them left, to be fair, only 12. But the Guardians of Khan Doom are no pushovers. Citadel Guard are also over here. More AP spears, going to be very, very necessary to throw off this attack. There's still Barrow Whites over here. They do not go down easily. And here are the men-at-arms. again forming a bit of a backstop, making sure that the enemy can't simply push their way through the elite Gondorians on the front. What's going on in this canyon over here? Still the Olag High swinging their mighty hammers. Saw massive cannon over here. There's still a healthy amount of Barding Herd here, all things considered. They've been on the front line taking range fire for a long time and been in melee with trolls, and there are still 40 of them left alive. And the AP from them has certainly helped them a great deal at holding these Morannon infantry at bay. The heavy maulers have probably given as good as they've got though. More Morannon infantry being committed forward, so Mordor have certainly taken upon themselves the responsibility for the central attack. Still just these Orc fodder units here. And at this point you can see all of these troops, Castamir's Legion, Flag Rim, all filtering down the other way. This is the time, now more than ever, for the Dol Amroth forces to counter-attack, because this would force the attackers to divide their forces, which at this point you need, because honestly over here, I mean it's surely only a matter of time before the attackers break through if things continue as they have done. A single unit of Athlon men-at-arms is not going to be enough to completely transform the fortunes of the defenders on this flank. I mean, they've done a decent job, and now they're pulling back, which is an even worse idea. Although, to be fair, the Ballista once again doing its grisly work. That Angmar Ballista has been such an important cornerstone of the attack over here. Meanwhile, this extra unit of Morannon infantry has been committed forward. There's some Troll Drummers in here now as well. They were also committed to Morannon archers that are out of ammunition. This pressure is going to tell eventually. What does Dol Amroth do? Son of the Dunedain here. The battle will quite literally hinge on Dol Amroth at this point. I think Dale and Gondor have already taken losses to the point where I don't know if I would call it cost efficient. I mean, usually the defenders at this point in a battle are further ahead than this. But then, Dol Amroth still has the numbers and the disposable units, which never underestimate having some cannon fodder. Castamir's Legion, they've taken some losses on the approach actually. So the archers still very much in effect. Across the way over there, the Nimrodel Rangers. And Blackshot Dragon Slayers. But the Gundabad Guard are also moving forward, and at this point I would be very interested to see how the defenders are going to handle this. I don't think that Ballista is going to have much joy now. I think the defenders have sort of decided to use the terrain to their advantage to shield them from that. Meanwhile, the Gundabad Guard are a very good spear unit, and they might honestly be enough to defeat this men-at-arms unit that has already been in melee. Especially seeing as they're winded. Man-at-arms are going to need some support, and the Citadel Guard will be the ideal support. That additional AP. Indeed. Look at those drums littering the field. The Barding Herd now defeat seems certain. There simply aren't enough of them left. Although at this point Dale have committed another unit of Earls, so they still believe that the outer defence, holding it, is going to be the way to go, and I would agree. Over there is where the attackers are concentrating the majority of their force. Eventually Dol Amroth have to attack. Surely they have to. And I think they actually, well, they were, but they led the way with Belfalas Marines, which actually, you know, they do make good makeshift infantry, and they will be enough to defeat Orc fodder. And at the very least, the threat of a counter-attack is going to force the attackers to leave more men over here. The Nav Rim, however, are also laying down some Overwatch fire. What have they got left over there? I mean, they've got Warlords, Corsair Pikemen, Gamp Rim, Guardians of Khandu, Narduzagar, Legion, Khandu, Halberds, Temple Executioners. They've got a real mixed bag of stuff still. So credit to the attackers, they have committed forward varying types of units here to the attack. With the addition of those Earls, Dale has once again managed to stabilise their front line. But it's over here, I think, where the main event is truly happening, because the attackers are now starting to crest the hill. The Castamir's Legion, the Gundabad Guard, they're going to need to support that Flag Rim, however. This is the moment for the attackers. If they can break through here, the entire outer defensive line would be in jeopardy. We are now decently beyond the halfway point of the battle, after all. I'm sure we will see the interior of Thranduil's halls eventually in this battle. You would imagine that the attackers eventually are going to break through. And indeed, this is what they need to do. The Flag Rim can potentially wrap up this line, and with their AP damage, that could be a devastating blow to this outer defence, which elsewhere is still holding relatively well. These Bardian marksmen are firing, but not really hitting a great deal. Not a good angle at all.
The enemy are badly bloodied.
There goes the Edelon man-at-arms. Good spot there from Cole. 2 units of Loke Flag Rim pushing around the flanks, and it forced one of the lower tier units of men-at-arms to rout off and break. And at this point the Fountain Guard are going to find themselves hopelessly outnumbered, you would imagine, to Gundabad Guard and Castamir's Legion. And now the Flag Rim going to be taking on the Nimlothian Honor Guard. Although one of their units is. The other unit is going to try and attack the rear, I think. Maybe go after the Pelagear Marines before they can throw their Javelin payload. And indeed they are. So obviously this unit of Flag Rim has been thrown to the walls, because this unit of Nimlothian Honor Guard will stomp them into the dirt. But they are just a distraction to keep them occupied, because these Pelagear Marines, those Javelins could have been a very useful tool, and now they are not going to be able to be used. And over here, honestly, the front line for Gondor is starting to look a little bit stretched. The Barrow Wights are still here, which is highly amusing. What's going on here in the middle? Mordor are pushing up more. Well, I say Mordor. Angmar are now pushing up a unit of Halberdiers, which the AP will certainly be welcome against Dale. They won't be able to beat a unit of Barding Herd, and indeed Dale are actually pushing up another unit, so it's possible that the defenders are just going to fight and die on the outer defence. They're putting forward a lot of resistance here. Bardian Marksmen. Those Belfast Marines are pulling back. I mean, Son of the Dunedain is very, very eager on forcing the attackers into his neat defensive line, but I mean, honestly, if I were Angmar, I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I mean, at this point, you need to force him to attack you, because elsewhere you're having some joy. Over here you can see these Flag Rim just hoovering up these Pelagear Marines, and then over here the Citadel Guardsmen facing off against the Castamir's Legion, hated enemies. The Gondorian Helm's still present. We have some Nar Rim that are out of ammunition, so they're just being committed over here to the fight. Presumably they're going to try and get a nice rear charge onto this position over here. Nimlothian Honor Guard obviously easily successful over there. Bardian Marksman in a much better firing position now. But again, the Nar Rim now getting in behind, and that's going to be the end of these units here. So another unit of Fountain Guard and Citadel Guard falls by the wayside. Although the Nimlothian Honor Guard are going to countercharge that charge. This unit of Flag Rim has already done its work, so I'm curious to see what they're going to do. They're actually going to rear charge the Honor Guard, so it is a case of rear charge after rear charge, surround after surround. But these Flag Rim are in full view of the Caer Andros marksmen, so that probably won't last too long. There goes the Gondorian General though. Good catch. I mean, the Nimlothian Honor Guard are still pretty healthy, so the fact that they managed to kill the General is a stroke of good luck for the attackers, which they may need. Admittedly, the Gondorian morale is such that they won't easily rout, especially with the units they've got left being mostly on the higher end of things. And once again, it falls on Dol Amroth to try and reinforce Gondor. Earls of Escaroth and Ethelon Man-at-Arms moving over here to try and prevent the attackers from continuing their assault. What's going on here in the middle? The Angmar Halberds have pushed in, but ultimately a single unit of basic Halberds is not going to be enough to push their way through Barding Herd and Earls of Escaroth. The Dalian forces present here on the front line are simply of too high a quality. But the attackers are moving forward with yet another line of good infantry. The Sauron's Will are making their way forward, which that sort of AP on the front line here could be the sort of thing which forces Dale into a bit of a sticky situation. The Guardians of Kharn were sent packing by Dol Amroth. That's unsurprising. That was a bit of a poor move from Horsey Hawks. I mean, it's very clear here that the Dol Amroth position over here is going to be too strong for one unit of infantry. And at this point, Dol Amroth has now sort of spread out, and they're going to be reinforcing their allies first and foremost, which is good to see that they finally committed to something. And whether it was attacking or reinforcing the other front lines, either one would have been a good move. And now we have some Sauron's Will on the front line, so it'll be interesting to see how that affects things. The additional AP from the Sauron's Will is the sort of thing which can definitely affect the fight, and the Barding Herd are not in a very good formation here, so their halberds won't be able to keep them at arm's length very long. The Bardian Marksman may need to be committed into this frontal defensive position. Another unit of Castamir's Legion have been committed. Guardians of Khan Doom are on the way forward. The Citadel Guard, the Nimlothian Honor Guard, attacking them from the front is always a bit of a sticky proposition. But they do have sufficient backup at this point. They've got a decent unit of men-at-arms from Dol Amroth and then a upper-end unit of infantry from Dale over here to help them out. So even the Guardians of Khan Doom shouldn't really be enough here. I mean, the Castamir's Legion fighting from the front. This is an interesting move, however. We have a unit of Balshoth tribesmen from Cole. I think they're under arrow fire, but their javelins could well prove to be an important factor in this fight. They're trying to go after the Nimlothian Honor Guard. Honestly, I'd go for the Earls. The Earls are in a much more juicy position, and you also risk a bit more friendly fire. Looks like the attackers are going to have more luck over here. There's Corsair Pikemen, so they're fully committing to trying to break through over here. What about down here? Mordor has essentially been left to try and break through here all on their lonesome. The Sauron's Will are trying their best, but the addition of these Bardian Marksmen, the numbers that they're offering here on the front line, might be enough to hold this defensive position. Still, that Dol Amroth front line is rather static. I mean, at this point with all of this, I'd attack. Surely you've got to attack. Come on, Dol Amroth, please. There's basically nothing over here. Guardians of Khan Doom again. It looks like he's going to be going for a piecemeal approach. You just got to attack, man. They're so vulnerable. It's too good an opportunity to pass up. Looks like they're finally going to do it. Or are they going to retreat? That would be a real shame. I get so exasperated when people don't attack. People are so eager to defend because it's the easiest thing to do, but when you've got an opportunity this juicy to just sort of crush the attacker's spirits, it's too good to pass up, and it's a bit foolish not to take advantage of it. Meanwhile, Corsair Pikeman defeat seems like a distinct possibility. They're of course immediately coming under arrow fire because they're so vulnerable to it. On this front line, there's not many Nimlothian Honor Guard left, only 15, and their formation has been somewhat compromised. So it's going to be left to the Athlon men-at-arms and the Earls to try and hold this position, and hope that the range support that they're being given is enough to hold back the attacking force. We still have just under 20,000 frames to go, so this battle is far from done at this point. What's going on over here? Nimrodel Rangers. So yeah, they're the only force that have been committed forward. And the Guardians of Khan Doom are not going to go down easily, and the Nimrodel Rangers, honestly, if they had support from just one of these spear units, they would be enough to completely overwhelm the Guardians of Khan Doom. But as it is, far too passive. I disapprove. You can't expect the attackers to always just funnel their way into your meticulously prepared defense. You need to be prepared to be a little bit more proactive, I feel. We'll see if it ends up costing the defenders in the long run, because ultimately if the attackers do manage to break through, it will have cost them in some capacity. There's not too much in the way of reserves left. Well, I say that, there's still a fair amount of scattered troops over the other side of the river, and the Temple Executioners are on their way. Angmar Helber's routing, another unit of Orc Javelins being sent forward. Dale are really eager to keep this defensive position intact. But the Sauron's Will won't go down too easily. And at this point it is mostly archers that are out of ammunition that have been committed, and Sauron's Will be able to easily defeat Bardian Marksmen and Dalian Marksmen in combat. And the Earls of Escalation, not many of them left, not many Barding Herd left, so this central position is looking a little bit ropey at this point. They might need the assistance of some of those Athlon Halberdiers. Bardian Marksmen are fighting against some Flagrim which attack too far in. Meanwhile, we also have some Carmel Shadow Guards, so that's even more AP on the front line. And once again, we see the Guardians of Khan Doom leading the way in the vanguard. Corsair Pikemen as well. And some Belagyr archers have managed to take this elevated ground from Gondor. Etalon's men-at-arms. Yeah, you can see here this is where the defensive lines are starting to fall apart. There's a lot of routing starting to happen. And at this point, it's highly likely that the defenders are going to start to struggle to hold these positions. And in the middle here, eventually you'd have to imagine that the Saurons are going to have their effect as well. I mean, it won't be as quick as it seems to be happening on the Gondorian front, but even so, the defenders are starting to struggle to hold these outer positions. So at this point, a decision must be made. Are they going to continue to hold the outer positions, or are they going to fall back to Thranduil's halls? And at this point, Colt, this is exactly what I like to see. I feel as though there have been a lot of good moves here from the attackers thus far. There have been mistakes as well. I feel as though, you know, individually, the attackers have, well, as a unit, I feel as though the attackers have moved pretty well, but, you know, you have to say that Gondor did make the best of a pretty bad situation initially. Now, the Dragon's Wrath Warlords, if they move up here and start to spread throughout the area, it's going to be very, very difficult for the defenders to pull back the necessary troops. So we're going to stick with the Dragon's Wrath Warlords here, because this could be the moment where the attackers hammer home a bit of an advantage here in this battle. And the Dragon's Wrath Warlords are multiple HP Lancers, so they get a good charge off. It's going to really hurt. What are they going to go after? Presumably some ranged units. That is the Dalian Catapult. Kabul's Shadow Guard fighting. That Dalian front line is about to be assaulted. And these Kaer-Andros marksmen are going to be the target of the Dragon's Wrath Warlords. And that is a pretty decent charge. Limiting the defensive ranged units in the final stand will of course be important. You want to avoid those halberds if you can help it. Oh no, he's not going to charge right into them, is he? Ooh. I mean, they weren't in formation, but as soon as they get those halberds down, it's going to be ugly. A decent amount of casualties. And they didn't lose too many units, but I mean, at this point they are being focused. I mean, the panic has probably set in for the defenders. They realise that if they are going to retreat safely, they're going to need these warlords out of the equation. Some Barrow Wights, and over here you can see the Dalian front line is being pressured from all sides. There's some Girian's Paladins, which I actually missed in the compositions at the start, so they must have been hidden away somewhere in the trees. Finally, it looks as though the Barrow Wights are going to be destroyed, because the Girian's Paladins should be enough to finally send them to their eternal rest. And also these Blackshot Dragon Slayers over here. I mean, at this point, what is going on over here? Etalon's men-at-arms that are routing. And yeah, Dol Amroth are in full retreat here, so it is going to come down mainly to Dol Amroth, you would say. There goes the Dalian Catapult. What a shot that was from the ballista across the way. Absolute pinpoint accuracy there from an Orc ballista of all things. Temple Executioners are on the front line, so yeah, I mean, this is the end for these Dalian troops. They're doomed. So how much of the attack has still got left? They've got Blackwatch Legion, which in a final stand situation, the Blackwatch Legion with their ability to just pummel their way through the front line is going to be extremely useful. Witch Realm Hammer Guard and Blackguard, Naran Arrow Rear Guard, so the attackers still have elite troops, which is going to be very, very handy. The Dragon's Wrath Warlords are still causing havoc around here. There's a unit of Blackwatch Legion already on the front line. Those Dragon's Wrath Warlords, I think, are just going to cycle charge into these Etalon's men-at-arms and send them packing. Another good charge. I mean, relatively slow, but I mean, at this point, yep, they're going to rout off and break. Good use of the Dragon's Wrath Warlords from Cold. I mean, it was ballsy to charge into the front of those halberds, but you still actually did a decent amount of damage. Girian's Paladins taking some ranged fire. Oh, a rear charge into the halberdiers. Again, they need to be careful around the halberds. They're not quite as kryptonite to the cavalry as pikes are halberds, but they can still do horrendous amounts of damage if you leave them in melee for any length of time. The AP certainly helps. Carmel Shadow Bows as well. That's a ranger unit, and they're going after the Girian's Paladins. Several of them starting to fall, so that's going to be HP that's been shaved off them as they run for the hills. It'll be interesting to see how they approach this, because you know, those Dora and Ernil pikemen are forming a bit of a rear guard to make sure the cavalry can't chase them any further once they get to the bridge. But certainly they're going to want to put up a stand inside the halls, I would imagine, rather than on this bridge, because if they make a stand outside, that's going to allow some of the defensive or offensive range units to have their way. Meanwhile, this trebuchet is still in effect. Interesting to see how this trebuchet is dealt with. I mean, it's been left all on its own, so as soon as it's engaged by anything, and the cavalry has noticed it, so they are not long for this world. Can they get off another hit? I don't think so, because they're sort of rotating the piece of siege equipment around. Over there you can see the Gamper moving forward. Out from the side there's some E-strong crossbowmen as well. So we're sort of rapidly approaching the sharp end of this battle now, the final stand where it will all be decided. And the attackers, well, the defenders are still ahead in terms of percentages, and this is traditionally where crunch time happens. It's going to be very close. The Dragon's Wrath Warlords. I don't really need to say that the Dragon's Wrath Warlords are easily going to be able to deal with the trebuchet, well, as long as they actually stay in melee with it. Not sure what they're doing now. Going to try and get a more clear-cut charge, I suppose. They didn't actually get their lances out though, so it was a rather pointless endeavour in the end, but the trebuchet has been shut down at this point. So let's go and see what's happening throughout the rest of the battle. Still being hunted down, the defenders, units, but at this point I think they have managed to save everything that they're going to be able to save. There's Nimrodel Rangers, which would be a really unfortunate thing to have to leave behind. But at this point they have these units of pikes out here, covering what units are able to get inside. Blackroot Vale Archers, Etalon's Man-at-Arms, and some Bardian units, I think those were, managing to get inside, although, you know, this cliff face. Now this could be interesting, because the Blackwatch Legion are going to be the first ones in, and they'll be able to crush their way through this pike line, and that means these pikes would not be able to really lay down any sort of cost efficiency of their own. And at this point I think they realise that, so they're going to leave one unit of pikes to sort of fend for themselves, and they're going to try and get this other unit of pikes out of there, although that's a lot of ranged fire that's being brought down upon them. So yet more casualties. So again, as soon as the outer defence falls, you can see that the attackers, they pounced on it pretty well. I mean, these are only Corsair archers, but they're still going to deal good damage to pikes. Impressive play by the attackers so far. The defensive position is difficult to overcome, but you can see that already they've managed to pull back another couple of percent, and this is where the percentage of kills really starts to become more important. The Gondorian army is left largely in tatters, so they're not going to be able to rely on any sort of elites from Gondor. Dale as well have taken some heavy losses, so again it's going to be Dol Amroth, and we'll see if the passive nature of Dol Amroth throughout this fight will pay off, because they do still have an army which is damaged, but the most intact singular army on the field, shall we say. And in the end the Blackwatch Legion were not really needed for all that long. The pike line disintegrated in the face of the archers, and now they are routing in place. So how the attackers choose to approach this is going to be relatively key. They're going to need to unite all of their forces here in front of Thranduil's halls, and then they're going to need to attack as one. Honestly, if they attack together with the use of the Blackwatch Legion, I think they should come out of this on top. What's going on, I wonder, with the Dragon's Wrath Warlords? They're still just fighting against the Trebuchet crew, so the Trebuchet crew's put up a stalwart effort. Now the Nimrodel Rangers have hidden themselves. They are around here somewhere. Or are they? Well, no they aren't. That was the Nimrodel Rangers. So yeah, the Dragon's Wrath Warlords crushed them. I thought they managed to hide themselves, but alas, no they didn't. Carmel's Shadow Bows, so some attacking rangers. Never go amiss. Corsair Fencers as well. We don't get to see the Corsair Fencers an awful lot. Obviously a brutal unit if you can get them into a sustained melee without being attacked at range, and at this point in the battle that's exactly the sort of situation which could reveal itself. Which round Blackguard, which did lose, well, it took a grazing hit very early on during the cut content from the Trebuchet from Dol Amroth. There's a lot of Corsairs in here as well. There's some Corsair Pikes, I believe. Yes, there are. They've got some pikemen. They've got everything they need to mount a pretty comprehensive assault. So let's head within Thranduil's walls, or halls. And again, it always tends to work out the same way here. I don't think we've ever seen the defenders actually win from this position. The only time I've seen the defenders, when they've been outnumbered an army, win on Thranduil's halls was when they managed to hold the outer defence to the death. When they fell back to Thranduil's halls, I've not seen them win thus far. But they do have ranged units that will be very useful. Athelian Rangers. They've got some Carandra's Marksmen. Nimrodel Rangers, another unit of Nimrodel Rangers, so he got two. So he tanked the cost increase for the sake of having two Rangers, which might prove to be an important factor here, but I don't know if they've got the infantry forces left to withstand this. I mean, Dol Amroth have got a lot of men left, but a lot of it is bread and butter stuff. Like, the Halberdiers are good, the Tarnostian Guard are average spearmen. Got some Girian's Paladins. They do have some elite units, but I think the attackers have just got too much. A singular... Well, they're celebrating the Blackroot Vale Archers like they've just won the battle, but they really only killed one man of a Sauron's Will unit. Let's see what's going on outside. So again, I think it's probably best if we bump it up to 6 speed while the attackers decide what to do. And it looks as though Umbar are going to lead the way with their Abrazani, which are certainly a very tough unit. Here we go. This is going to be it. The attack begins. What are they doing over there, I wonder? What on earth is Horsey Hawks doing? You can't be serious, surely. This is their chance. What is he doing? I'm incredibly confused by this. This could be the attackers throwing away their chance of victory. Unless they've noticed something that I haven't. Unless there's like a Dol Amroth ambush force around here. Yes, there is. Well, this was a pretty interesting omission from the retreat. I can only assume that this was an oversight from the Dol Amroth player, because the Haven Guard cannot hide with the general in their unit. So this is going to be death for them. I don't really think they need the Blackwatch Legion over here to kill them off. The Blackwatch Legion are going to be extremely necessary to trying to take Thranduil's halls, but as is. Of course, their fences are in here now, although they're in full view of the archers, so that's extremely unfortunate for them. But they're still going to be able to deal decent damage to the Dragon Slayers and the Girian's Paladins. But the attackers really don't want to throw this all away now. I'm very confused by what I'm seeing. The attackers spent all this time gathering together their forces only to send in units in drips and drabs. I'm staggered. This essentially, I excuse the Dol Amroth player for all of the bad things, because this right here is quite literally a horror show from the attackers. What they're doing right now, a united front into Thranduil's halls, and this unit of Haven Guard would have been irrelevant. Instead, they're choosing to hunt it down with every fibre of their being, and it could cost them the battle. And indeed, I would not be surprised if it did. As you can see, the initial Umbar force here is just being sent packing with ease. I mean, yeah, the Paladins have taken some casualties, but a unit of Abrazani and the Corsair Fencers, of all things, have been thrown to the wolves for relatively little gain. I mean, again, there are invisible walls all throughout Thranduil's halls, but to be honest with you, the attacking archers are not really going to be able to get the most in terms of hits here, and most of Dol Amroth's forces are relatively good at absorbing arrow fire anyway. Daily and Royal Guard getting a nice rear charge there on the Corsair Fencers should be enough to send them packing. There's a banner carrier over there. Well, this is going to be the end of the Fencers, you would guess, and that's unfortunate. We don't get to see them all that often, and they can be a brutally effective unit when used correctly, but this was them used horribly. Etalon's Men-at-Arms, Halberdiers as well. Well, we do have some pikemen moving forward, but again, this is exactly the sort of unit which needs to be supported if it's going to be effective. As it is, they're not really going to be able to get into a good formation, and if they're surrounded by elite units, they're going to get pummeled into the dirt. What's going on with the Haven Guard? At the very least, they need to, well, there's your answer. Imrahil destroyed, and indeed, with the Hammer Guard on hand, it's likely to be a very one-sided fight indeed. The Haven Guard, you know, to leave them behind like this is a bit of an oversight by Dol Amroth, but in the end it might actually prove to be something which helps them, because the attackers have spread themselves in a way which I'm very confused as to why they've done this. I mean, this is the kind of thing, if they were doing this and not committing any units into Thranduil's halls, then yeah, because it would just be them securing their rear flank and then waiting to attack, but as is, they're throwing units away here all the while they're doing this, and of course their pikemen routing. I mean, they were under such severe range fire, so again, Umbar has lost a lot of decent troops here that they could have used in the final assault. For essentially no gain. The Girian's paladins, I think, are largely destroyed. Indeed, but that's not really enough. They had already been largely dealt with by the Carmel shadow bows on the retreat into the halls in the first place. I mean, it's still going to be difficult for the defenders, to be honest. With all of the troops they have left, I mean, a lot of it is still just basic stuff. I mean, we'll see. They still have some genuinely powerful units, but it's going to be difficult to deal with the elites. I mean, it's going to be really difficult for them to deal with stuff like, maybe not so much the Sauron's Will, but certainly the Carmel's Chosen, the Witch Realm Hammer Guard, the Blackwatch Legion especially are going to be a real problem when they finally get here, because they can just bulldoze their way through the front line. And indeed, the defenders have fallen behind. Just going to turn it up to 6 speed while they decide to advance again. And, well, I mean, this time they are at least putting up a more comprehensive attack. They have the Narun Aruror Guard and the Gamprim following the Corsair pikemen in. And of course, a lot of this depends upon how much ammunition the defenders have left, which I would assume is not all that much. I mean, there are Athelian Rangers over here, which will cut through Corsair pikemen like a knife through butter. Case in point. Now we see how good Dol Amroth's central infantry line really is, because they don't really have anything exceptional here. Still some Corsair archers that are out of ammunition here as well, joining the fight, and just as some cannon fodder. We are now well within the final 10,000 frames, and I still think the attackers are going to win. But I was extremely confused by what they did with the Blackwatch Legion earlier on. I mean, it doesn't matter too much now because they are going to be approaching this situation. And as soon as the Blackwatch Legion gets on the front line, you would imagine that this fight is probably all but over. Look at that body piercing. That's going to be worth a lot of kills. And of course, their pikemen not really going to be able to deal the required damage all on their lonesome. Here come the Carmel's Chosen and Shadow Guard, however. And the Carmel's Chosen are going to be difficult to deal with. I mean, the Halberdiers might be able to deal some decent damage to them with their AP. But the multiple HP nature of them means that the Tarnostian Guard are not really going to be able to lay a scratch on them. These Athelian Rangers, however, are going to be dealing some pretty impressive amounts of damage as this goes along. And they are now targeting the Carmel's Chosen. And meanwhile, this front line over here, I think we're going to be going halberd to halberd. Indeed, the Etalon's men-at-arms are facing the Loka Gamprim. And the Etalon's men-at-arms helping would lead me to believe that this is probably going to go in favour of Dol Amroth, but as soon as reinforcements are given. Of course, I had a crash. You know, this game loves to test me in such ways. This is around about the same time, so we can see the Carmel's Chosen just coming in here. I've turned the settings down a little bit, and I don't really feel comfortable getting close to the blob while the body-piercing projectiles are doing their work, considering that was probably what made it crash. We can see that the Gamprim are also moving back into position as they were over there. We can also see the Shadow Bows are also getting back into position, so we are around about the same position. Yeah, it's really going to come down to how much damage the Rangers can do here. As to, you know, the whole defensive... the whole hopes of the defenders essentially rest on these 3 units of body-piercing Rangers. The Blackroot Vale, the Nimrodel, and the Athelian. Now this is a lot of body-piercing projectiles the attackers are going to have to go through. Now they do have some of their own, but the Carmel's Shadow Bows are going to be horrendously outgunned in this situation. And of course Rangers don't tend to do well in a skirmish fight, especially not when they're outnumbered by multiple units of their own kind. So yeah, it will be interesting to see how well the attackers hold up to this. It does look as though Rune are prepared to take the brunt of this, and that is understandable because I still think that as soon as the Blackwatch Legion are committed, and as soon as those really high tier Angmar units come forward, as soon as what's left is what the Temple Executioners, and indeed here they come, the Blackwatch Legion, so I think immediately seeing this, Son of the Dunedain is realising that he's going to need to shore up his line. I'm not sure how much a single unit of Blackroot Vale Archers is going to do that, but the Blackwatch Legion could be heading over to try and push down that way, which would be interesting, because that would mean that this line over here may very well hold up to the pressure. I mean, the Tarnostian Guard are going to need support from the men-at-arms and the other units they've got in reserve. They've still got a unit of pikes left alive. Dale still have their general. They're the only defensive faction to still have their general intact. And immediately the Dalian Royal Guard are going to the area where the Carmel's Chosen are threatening to break through. Going to try and shore up the line, and at this point Dol Amroth just need to throw everything in and hope that their Rangers are capable of dishing out the amount of damage that is necessary. Caer Andros Marksman. The Dol Amroth Rangers are hidden now, which is not a good sign. If they still have ammunition, they just need to be firing. There's no room for manoeuvre here anymore. And indeed, I think they've pulled their swords out. No, they still have their bows. I'm very confused as to what they're doing. There's been some very questionable play here in the late game. There's no time for this pissing around. Your front line is in severe jeopardy, as I try not to sort of enter the roof. And this is why the Blackwatch Legion is such an effective tool in the late game, because they're just bulldozing their way through the Dol Amroth front line. It's one of the main reasons why you want to bring them here. And indeed, even when they are under arrow fire, to try and prevent this, I mean, the Rangers may try, but the huge great shields that the Blackwatch Legion have, as well as the good armor values, mean they're going to be able to withstand that pretty well. And the Blackroot Vale Archers are now firing once more. But once again, too late, I think. It's very possible that it would have been too late anyway, regardless of what Son of the Dunedain did with his 2 units of Rangers. But even so, there really is no time for this. I mean, at the very least, you want to just bunch your Rangers together and get as much damage down range as possible. Now you've got Easterron crossbows and Corsair archers pouring in as well. Witchround Blackguard are also in here. So it is going to be the end, unfortunately, for the defenders. And again, you have to ask yourself how much that initial rather reckless attack from Gondor ended up costing the defenders here, because what they would give for 2 units of Gondor infantry and a unit of Citadel Guard here in the late game to help them hold down the fort, it might still not have been enough, those 3 units, but even so, you have to ask yourself. Also, a lot of that Fountain Guard that was butchered by that very well placed Angmar Ballista, so a lot of credit goes to Horsey Hawks for that Ballista. What is going on here? The Nimrodel Rangers have marched themselves into a position where it's ironically more difficult to get shots off than they were in previously. I think they're going to try and shoot into the backs of the units that are over here, but it's far too late. They honestly, if that was their plan, they should have just marched down here and stood about here in this position, and indeed they're going for the Easterron crossbows, which, fair enough, it'll pad your kill count, but it won't really get you much in terms of victory. I mean, the crossbows are returning fire, but they don't really have the arc of fire to be super effective there, and indeed they're Dragon Wrath Guildsmen as well. So yeah, Rune had another ace up their sleeve just in case. This is going to be the end. We still have about, well, just under 3,000 frames though, so it's not as if Dol Amroth and what remains of Dale and Gondor are going to go down without a fight. And this ultimately has been a very close siege. It's flipped backwards and forwards multiple times, which is always a good thing. It might be within the 10% mark, maybe, just about. Either way, it doesn't really matter. There's not the gold standard for saying what's close. It's just a pretty good marker to use, especially in smaller battles. But in larger ones like this, you have to take a more macro view of things and how the battle went. There were mistakes on both sides, I think, but again, the problem with mistakes is the defenders can't really afford to make too many mistakes in a situation where they're outnumbered, and unfortunately the ones they did make, I think, cost them. It's entirely possible that a Dol Amroth attack earlier on in the battle would not have changed the outcome of the battle, but it would have been something a little bit more proactive. As it is, I feel as though Dol Amroth too defensive, and if you're too passive, you're essentially allowing your fate to be decided for you. If you're being too defensive in this situation, you're essentially banking on the attackers making a catastrophic error, which in the end they didn't. It looked as though they could have. Looked as though they could have when they started committing units without Angmar present, but fortunately I think they told Umbar to stop that nonsense, and ultimately, as a unit, they did rather well for themselves. Temple Executioners are moving forward now, so yeah, the Black Watch Legion just went through that what was left of the Dol Amroth line like it wasn't even there. Victory over there for Rune, and, well, just Rune actually, well, there's Witchround Blackguard as well, but this is going to be the end, unfortunately. The Nimrodel Rangers may try and run. Ultimately, though, that won't really help them. There goes the Dalian General. The Nazgul were always there as well, so hard to keep track of a unit of just 10 on the field, but they're still here, which again, the attackers just had so much left in reserve at the end in terms of quality. The defenders, they were a little bit too liberal with how easily they threw away their units, and at this point, I mean, there's no real need for this. I mean, kiting is all well and good, but you don't really stand a chance at this point. They tried to get one last volley off, but this is going to be the end. The Nimrodel Rangers will be the last unit left standing. And they're pretty decent in melee, honestly. A lot of these more expensive Rangers have got a lot of skill, but something else which has a lot of skill is the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen. They're up in the, I think they've got 24 defensive skill, which is, a lot of elves don't even have anywhere near that amount, so it's a very impressive amount of skill that the Guildsmen have. They might be the most skillful assassin units in the game, although I'd have to have a look at the Gwathi Erin Gallen from Mirkwood. So this is the end of a very long marathon battle, and in the end the attackers did win, which I'm sure some people aren't too happy about, but the blue team didn't win. So, some people will be happy, other people won't be. That's just the nature of things, I suppose. But yeah, Dragon's Wrath Warlords. Good use of the Warlords in that middle section of the battle as well. Close battle though. That's what we like to see. Having a look at the kill counts here. So Gondor getting the most kills with just shy of 2,800, which are not too surprised about considering that they had to deal with the vast majority of the pressure early on. Ultimately, of course, that led to their army being tattered far quicker than the others. Dale also had to deal with a fair amount of pressure as well. They had a narrow defensive point that they could look after, but even so, they had to deal with essentially most of Mordor's attacking in that earlier section of the battle came down the middle, so Dale had to deal with that. They also had to deal with the Olag High and the Troll Drummers. Not an easy task when you have to keep a good defensive line, but the Barding Herd and the Elves of Escaroth just about managed it. Dol Amroth with the fewest kills, but then they did leave the most in reserve, so again, that's not really a reflection on how well they played. I still feel as though it was maybe a little bit of an error to be so passive for so long. That was ultimately, I think, what sealed the defenders' fate. They needed to be more proactive if they were going to overcome the vast difference in terms of numbers. Obviously, the Orc factions here. Angmar actually bringing the least amount of troops. They had the most elite army, though. The highest amount of kills on the attacking army went to Rune, and I do feel as though some of the things that Rune did impressed me in this fight. Feel as though even right from the start, they were trying to get in and around the defensive positions with their clansmen. They did the same with their Flagrim. They went after good targets. Of course, the Warlords in that middle section of the battle hunted down individual units, which again further hammered the nails into the coffin. So yeah, I think a very good fight all around. There wasn't anything too egregious, in spite of my own protests. It's just how I do things, I suppose. Having a look at the kills of the Gondorians, having the Nimlothian Honor Guard getting a lot, considering they were only in battle for a short amount of time. Citadel Guard also getting in excess of 200. The Athelian Rangers getting just shy of 500, obviously, in the late game. They were able to shoot into that blob. Ultimately, it wasn't enough to turn the defenders' fortunes around. Some Gondor infantry getting okay amounts of kills, others getting rather more overwhelmed. I suppose those were the two units that were committed early. Having a look elsewhere. Karandros Marksmen didn't really pay for themselves all that much, to be honest with you. I think, you know, the unit that got caught didn't really help matters. They didn't really have the best angle of firing. I feel as though up on that cliff you can fall into the trap of trying to shoot the enemies that are closer to the wall, which can ultimately lead to you wasting a lot of ammunition. The Wardens of Minas Ithil were responsible, I think, for slaying the Witches before they were able to do anything, so that's very worthwhile. Fountain Guard, again, differing fortunes between which one was caught in the ballista fire most and which one least. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this rather long battle. It's the longest battle I've done in quite some time, and yeah, I hope you will join me for whatever is next.